Yeah. It says we're live here on my end. Oh. Well, I apologize, everyone. We had some audio problems, and I think we're getting it worked out now. So we're about 27 minutes behind schedule, but I guess we'll go ahead and get started here now. And hopefully people can still join in. But we'll, of course, have this recorded, and we'll send the link out to you again. But I think we'll get started now. Feel free to ask questions as we go through. There's a place to type in questions, and we encourage you to, as you think of those questions, to go ahead and type those in, because sometimes it takes a couple minutes to type that out, and it can take a little longer to get to us. So we'll get to those at the end, but as we go through the presentation, you have a question, go ahead and type those in right away. So I'm Matthew Kruse. I'm here in Brazil, and so I'm not in my usual place, but David Kruse is going to be hosting this part of the webinar. Yesterday was Dr. Elwin Taylor. Today is David Kruse, and he's in our head office in Royal. So David, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. We'll try this for about hopefully the third time or so as a charm. This was a slide that was sent to me by a subscriber who thought it was a very good depiction of what he was going through in 2018. I'm a bit confused by what's going on in this slide, but I think everybody was a little uncomfortable looking at it, and I think people were kind of uncomfortable with 2018 as well. I was doing a presentation to a group recently, and there was a woman sitting in the front row who she just about fell off her chair laughing at this particular one. But I don't know that I felt that 2018 was quite that amusing. And so far, 2019 is a little bit of a challenge too. Now, what we are being challenged by is our president in trade wars. Essentially, he's been shooting at all of our trade partners, and to one degree or another, has yet to consummate too much positive as a result of it. Now, agriculture, I think, has been making some donations relative to on the short end of the stick so far on some of the tariffs that are being tossed back and forth. We haven't really been through anything quite like this since the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. That was a bad idea then. We'll see what the result ends up being this time around. But essentially, it depressed the world economy. Our tariffs were reciprocated by tariffs from our trading partners then, and really it's given credit for maybe worsening or extending the depression a couple of years. I think the bottom really came in 1932 as a result of that. It didn't do anybody any good as far as the tariff act then, and I guess it's yet to be seen, what benefit we get from it this time around. This is kind of what it looks like sometimes. It can, locusts or tariffs, but in actuality, the government did understand the impact on agriculture. And in Sunny Purdue came with the market facilitation loan program. Well, that wasn't a loan program, it was a payment to try and make up for some of the damage to at least the soybean market and hog market that was done, from all the tariffs and the trade war going on. That won't be enough if it continues, because the losses are still continuing, or our market losses as a result of this. We go back to how did we get to where we're at today? And then, there was a lot of us. I'm 66 years old, and the world as I knew it, was the old world order, so to speak. 1946, after World War II, the U.S. dominated most everything. They had a large meeting of all of the countries of the world, in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. And it was there that they really established what the world order was going to be. The United States was a very gracious winner, I guess, after World War II, and set out to try to really, help the world economy. So maybe we wouldn't, have future wars like what we've just gone through twice in Europe. But anyway, the empires were abolished. There was free trade established. The United States provided market access. It opened its markets. All shipping was protected and guaranteed security, really, from the United States military. Our Navy protected the shipping lanes. There was a lot of global institutions, that were created at that time. It really worked well from a standpoint of, was it beneficial to the world economy? Did it? And I don't think there's any argument that it was remarkably so. We go back to this particular chart, what it shows is the share of the world living in absolute poverty, and we've seen that we are making some significant progression. Sometimes they make it sound like we're not, around the world, but from where we were in going back to the Civil War to where we are today, as far as the amount of the world population living in poverty, we've done this old world order was remarkably successful. We have seen some astounding world economic growth. We've turned, I think, billions of what we previously called subsistence peasants, into consumers. And agriculture particularly benefits from that, because when consumers have a disposable income, probably the first thing they spend it on is calories and better food. And we're in a good stead to benefit from that. We're now entering a new period of foreign policy in our trade regimen. The old one, the Bretton Woods, the Marshall Plan, the UN, the WTO, World Bank, and multinational trade agreements are all being either changed or downgraded as in priority. Now we won't have a UN ambassador, we'll have a representative and that sort of thing. These all represented the old world order being replaced by, I guess, what's being called America First. We're going to use our military differently. We're not going to provide everyone security anymore. It's going to be American security. End multinational trade agreements, negotiate more bilateral ones. There's going to be no free lunch from the United States. We're not going to. The recent proposal was that any place that we would have troops around the world, they're going to have to pay the whole cost of those troops being there plus 50%. Was the plan that the president put out. We're going to reduce our support for the UN, World Bank, NATO, WTO, and we're doing more protectionism, including closing our borders. And we're also going to more strictly, limit immigration. Now that's really what America first looks like. One of the major changes that's taking place that's really right in front of us is our position in terms of energy, global energy production. This particular chart shows in 2007 that the United States was, they're importing oil from the Mideast. You can see the shipping line that goes down underneath the Horn of Africa and works its way up into the United States. We're getting oil from Mexico and Venezuela and Canada. At that time, a lot of Russia was the primary provider, into Western Europe, and the other major customers for Mideast oil was into Asia at that time. Well, new technology has drastically changed this to where, fracking has reinvigorated U.S. oil production to the point where this year we're going to become a net oil exporter. We'll still take some oil from Venezuela, but that's only because we have the refinery capacity to turn that into products that will then be exported. But you now see that we're going to be selling liquefied natural gas. Hopefully, we'll export even more ethanol. But about our only importer is going to be Canada, because it's sort of landlocked to go anyplace else. We'll be selling energy both directions out of our country. If you look at what comes to the Middle East, there's no line that comes from the Middle East to the United States anymore. There's very little that's moving around the Horn of Africa. All of that oil, most all of that oil is now being shipped into Asia. It's their market. So we're entering a period in this change that, of course, you go back to 1970 or whatever, when we were quite dependent on Mideast oil. This is a pretty much of a renaissance relative to our strategic vulnerability, our strategic need for access to Mideast oil. In other words, that it made sense to have a military presence in the Mideast to protect our energy interests, and now it doesn't. In other words, why would we need to have an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf when none of that oil is coming to the United States, and Saudi Arabia actually becomes a competitor to U.S. oil and energy exports? It is now in the interest of China and Japan and India, all that oil in the Mideast. And if there's going to be an aircraft carrier there, it would seemingly that it would be one of ours, but that's sometimes seen as a challenge to us too. Again, this is a chart that shows the choke points around the world, maritime-wise. You can see that the Strait of Malacca, from that oil that goes from the Mideast is very important. The Strait of Hormuz. They keep Iran sometimes threatens that they close the Strait of Hormuz. The only people they would not hurt us, because quite frankly we don't need that oil anymore. We're now self-sufficient, energy independent. They actually would hurt themselves, because they're the ones that needs the access out of the Strait of Hormuz to sell whatever oil that they're still allowed to under the sanctions there from Iran. And it would be somebody else's interest to protect that rather than our Navy. Again, I don't know where, there's a little island off of India called Sri Lanka. I guess it's actually a big island. But both Japan and China have now established ports there. And part of that is that's looking ahead toward a military presence to be able to protect their oil supplies coming from the Mideast and up into Asia. That also is another reason why China is so captivated on the militarization of the South China Sea, because that is their primary trade route, and very, very, very strategic to them, as we look ahead. Getting over to the agricultural side, we're going to look at what could be described as some balance sheet busters. We have had falling net farm income. I think we're like, I saw a statistic the other day. You got to be careful with statistics, but we're like $15 billion below the 90-year average or whatever, adjusted for dollars. It's we're half of what we were in 2012, and we got rising farm debt, plus increased debt service. As the cash flows don't work, one of the remedies to that is to start borrowing more money to be able to pay the bills. Interest rates are no longer 0% anymore. And I think there's a lot of farm loans, I think, in the 6% level. And so as that rises, it becomes more of a burden. We had negative 2019 projected rented farmland crop margins. That's going to vary from farmer to farmer and whatever his situation is. But for the most part, I think you'd have to describe 2019 as pretty much a break-even year. We have a diluted RFS. We have RIN waivers that reduced the 15 billion gallon mandate to 13.7. And that's actually, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but it's actually getting worse. It was just announced, I think both Reuters and Bloomberg had it overnight, that the EPA is going to approve another 29 of these small refinery waiver requests, and said that there was a promise made to Ted Kruse, and that's being kept by the EPA. I think that had something to do with him voting for the new Andrew Wheeler as the EPA head. And they're essentially, this administration is diluting the RFS. We've got, of course, our trade war with China. There's still tariffs galore floating around. And we're reshuffling the global supply chains as a result of that. How much investment are they putting into Brazil and such for origination? We're now starting to hear some. So how this outcome here in the next few weeks of the trade negotiations that are going on with China are going to be extremely important as we go forward. We've got African swine fever. There's risk both outside the United States and here. It's really, I think, out of control in China. And here, what they catch this week in the port of New Jersey, something like a million pounds or whatever of illicit Chinese pork that was interdicted. Thank goodness. I don't know about the tests yet on that particular pork, but somebody said that we should sell it back to them. There's a stubborn cost component of the balance sheet, at least on the crop side. It's been very difficult to get the costs down as to benefit as much as the makeup for the pressure that's been on revenue values. The two haven't been tied very closely together. We do have declining land values, although really it's been pretty remarkable at how well they have held up. We did not have the leverage put into the land purchases and in the preceding time as land prices went up. A lot of equity was put into it, and so therefore we're not seeing land come right back on the market as we did in the 1980s as well. Well, we do have an ag sector labor crisis. Really, if we do get the market open to China again on the Africans as a result of their African swine fever losses, and we would like to get our production and packing plants and stuff here, up to capacity to be able to provide for that market or take advantage of that market. Really, we do not have the labor to do that now. Prestige is getting started with their new plant, but to get to double shifts and such at all of our plants, I don't think that labor supply is out here. It's going to be a problem as we go on forward. We did avoid a loss of Kruse. We do have an agreement with Korea. I think that was more political. Trump was dealing with North Korea, and so I think he cut a deal with South Korea then, and so at least we don't have a conflict there. We do have potential trade gain with Mexico and Japan and the European Union if we could actually, negotiate and consummate some new trade deals. But it's a long ways away, it seems like, on all of those right now. We'll talk about that specifically later. There was some agreements for an extra proposed agreement for an extra $50 billion annually in commodity purchases in a Chinese shopping cart. This would predicate, however, on that trade deal being consummated, and we're not there yet. That would be a game changer if that happened. It'd be pretty phenomenal to put that much, into U.S. commodities at the expense of others. However, South America has benefited greatly, from our trade war with China, and that could reverse on them if this situation come around and China did make such a commitment to buy that much. We did get E15 vapor waiver approval. That's a positive change there. However, I would point out that the 5 RIN waivers that were worth 350 billion gallons that the EPA approved last week are enough to negate the benefit of E15 in this calendar year. They were looking at something 300 to 400 million gallons of potential gain from E15 in 2019, and they took away in those RIN waivers 350 billion gallons, or million gallons, excuse me, of ethanol demand as a result of RIN waivers. So they're giving us with one hand and taking away with the other. We do have some corn balance sheet strength. We've got just a 1.835 billion bushel carryover. That's manageable as long as we don't get too much heavy increase in acreage. Too many farmers planting more corn as a result of that and ruining that. We'll talk about that a little later. We do have the tax cuts for anyone that was making money. Those tax cuts, according to the Fed yesterday, are not having quite the ultimate impact. I think that some thought they would. The Fed feels that that the economy is now absorbed those and is only make 2.1% growth this year, and that was not worth another rate increase. So you can look at that as either glass half full or glass half empty. But anyway, it's they're maybe not having the impact that people thought that they might. We've got a strong general economy, however. This employment situation where we put a lot of people to work, and we're now seeing some wage improvement that should help meet demand. As I said, when consumers have some money, one of the first things they do is improve their diet. The overall outlook or the trend at this point in time on commodities in general is pretty evident in this particular chart. We're trying to find a bottom in this particular area. We're either basing for something, but there's nothing there yet to confirm that we've got that a low in place. From a cycle standpoint, there's a projected low in the CRB index somewhere between June and December. And so really it would come potentially later this year when it comes. We are extremely dependent in agriculture and our economy on exports. We talk about 74% of our cotton is exported, half of our soybeans, and how much distillers grain and stuff is actually exported. It's really made that market so that it's been beneficial at least to the ethanol producers. And so they're not just selling off ethanol from that aspect. At one point when that industry started, they were virtually giving away the DDGs. and now there's value to them because of exports. We've got, looking at the trade agreements, we're going to kind of go through each one of them here and kind of where we're at. As I mentioned, Kruse is good. That we've got some potential for some expanded trade there. We're seeing, benefits from the tariffs falling on both pork and beef there. At least we've got that trade agreement that's not bothering us at this point in time. We're trying to consummate the change or the shift from NAFTA 2.0 to what they're now calling the U.S. Mexican-Canadian agreement. Overall, you look at the big picture, we had 0 tariffs in NAFTA. We will have 0 tariffs under the new agreement. So there's really no major change to agriculture. There's a few small benefits. There's a slice of a better dairy market. There's a few tweaks here and there that, of course, are beneficial. It's hard to put some of that in large dollar sort of things, but right now these steel and aluminum tariffs are still on, and when those steel and aluminum tariffs that we placed on Canada and Mexico have been retaliated against, and they have tariffs on things like cheese and pork, and that's been damaging. And so we're digging a hole every day that we don't get this new agreement ratified, and that we're losing out on market opportunity that would be there otherwise, and we're essentially billions of dollars that is being lost in this interim period. So we need to get this signed and ratified by Congress. It's kind of that. I guess it's going to be a battle, a political battle that takes place in Washington. Are the Democrats going to give Trump a win on a trade agreement? They say they want changes to this. I don't think that there's really a provision for that to happen, and so the optimists are now talking. Summer or whatever for a vote and ratification, but the Midwest, the heartland, needs this trade agreement. It's very important to us. We need to stop, with really essentially our losses and get back to make the pain go away. At least get back to 0 tariffs. And if we could do that, we would see a significant increase in a lot of our exports to our previous NAFTA friends, I guess, so to speak. Japan is kind of waiting in the wings for they want to finish with China, and they have some plans for Japan. It's not going to be just a slam dunk of a trade agreement, finished with them either. We passed on TPP. Japan has been offering terms that were very similar to TPP, and TPP would have been very beneficial to U.S. agriculture. From our standpoint, it's going to be hard to think that we're really going to get much better deal from them than what we got in TPP. But in the interim time, again, we're the competitor out, I guess, so to speak. That they went ahead with TPP 11 with the other countries, and so Canada and Australia and New Zealand now all get a better tariff situation in Japan than what we have, and so they're more competitive than we are, and so we don't want to let this persist. We need to get past this situation with China and get an agreement done with Japan as well. Now, right now, these talks are stalled. Japan has said it's willing to make some concessions on agriculture to protect its auto industry. And that's not going to be good enough for Donald Trump. Opportunity to expand U.S. meat exports there. I think that's the case. I mentioned that Canada and Australia have better terms under TPP 11 than what we do now. We've got very much turmoil, in Europe right now with the Brexit. Sounds like Theresa May she's in Brussels today, asking for an extension because Britain has been unable to pass any type of a plan, anything that would transition their trade from the European customs, and nothing has been able to pass Parliament or any prospect of doing so. And so she wants some more time. Now Europe is saying that the British Parliament needs to pass her plan that they voted down overwhelmingly twice, and then they'll give an extension. And so both sides have a tendency to back down over there, but time will tell on that part of it. But Germany says was more like to give them a permanent extension and say just forget this whole idea, of Britain, backing out of the European Union. But I don't know that they're ready to do that yet either. I am a bit puzzled by how the British are handling this. That it was a nearly won referendum when they did so. And when they really found out how much it was going to cost them and how difficult it was to establish, a workable, trading relationship, post Brexit, there's been a lot of second guessing. And the polls in Britain now show that if it was put up to a second referendum, that they would vote to stay in. Part of it comes, I look at it from an age standpoint too, that there was quite a breakdown in the British vote, that the older people all wanted Brexit. They remembered the good old days, I guess, of the British Empire and such, and didn't like being tied into Europe. For the young people there, they were looking at their future, and they had a different perspective on things. And so the old people then were kind of taking away the future that the young people wanted, or dictating it to them. And I've also pointed out that this is a hugely momentous decision. And I don't know, in our Lutheran church, when we change bylaws, they have 2 votes a year apart. So it gives basically a time when you're making a major change, that if you vote to go ahead with something once, it gives you a year to think about it, and then you confirm it the next year that yes, this is what we want to do. I don't think Britain is anywhere near a level of confirmation that about the decision that they made for Brexit, and it seems to me that it would make a lot more sense for them to reconsider that. As far as looking at from Europe goes, they are exporting a lot more to the United States and importing a lot less from us. They are a protectionist organization. President Trump has correctly, I think, characterized them as being more protectionist in many ways than what China was. And so he's kind of put this on the shelf as he's dealing with China. But there's going to be a significant trade dust up, with the European Union when he's done. Now, the Europeans, they don't use the WHO, types of phytosanitary rules that we do and what they're supposed to do. They use a system called precautionary principle. In other words, if they can dream up any risk from anything, it gives them the right to ban something. That's why they don't take our ractopamine-fed meat. They don't want our chickens washed in chlorine. They don't want our GMOs. And so they actually didn't want to talk about agriculture in this trade agreement at all. And so we're not starting off on a very good stead for a particular trade agreement there. And there should not be, I don't think, any negotiations that does not include agriculture, but time will tell. I'm saying it is a very poor situation with the European Union. The ag was not included in preliminary trade talks. They are the most protectionist. They use the precautionary principle instead of science. They use their sanitary and phytosanitary trade barriers. It will be a major obstacle to resolution. And the automobile tariffs on the EU being threatened at this point in time. And of course, we've got the big dust up, the one with China that's taking place here. They were, our number 5 as a U.S. export, but number 1 above U.S. agricultural exports in 2016, at least. This is a little bit dated on this part of it, but they're who we need. That we are in a major battle. I think the battle in some ways goes beyond trade, but they're hard at it at this point in time. It kind of sums it up here. In 2017, the U.S. agriculture exported more than 140 billion to international markets, and almost 20 billion of that went to China. And that they've now put hefty tariffs on 90% of our ag goods as a result of the trade war. And so they're going to, of course, drop down in importance, as a result of this. But our markets have all, in our incomes, net farm income has felt that change. Their new deal is that they would buy 30 billion more than what they were buying before. So that was almost 20 billion. And so that means that they would come in and what they've offered to do is buy over $50 billion worth of U.S. commodities every year to help with their trade deficit. And that would be a game changer. It would be a phenomenal thing if that actually happens relative to our agriculture. It would be, the trouble is it doesn't get talked about what they're going to get for that. If they want something for it. It's not just coming over here as a gift to make us happy. There's some other things that we want from them that they are not going to be very as easily convinced to make concessions toward. And so time will tell here. We did have March 1st deadline for an extension. Well, that was because that would not increase any tariffs on them during this period. But it is causing, the uncertainty that global supply chains are reshuffling. They're never going to trust the United States again. We don't trust them either. That's where we're at today, almost, is in a level of distrust. And that's as they try to compensate for that in the trade agreement itself. Like Donald Trump yesterday, he made the comment that we were going to leave the tariffs on for a sustained period of time until we were sure that they were going to comply with whatever agreement was reached. And I don't see them being good with that, and so they're trying to come up with some means of that guarantees some compliance to this new trade agreement, and that's going to be one of the toughest parts of actually putting it together. The trade wars historically have led to military conflict. We're of course committed to the security, I guess, of Taiwan, but it's why we feel the need that we have to patrol the South China Sea as we do, today, is a little bit perplexing to me. I don't think that if the Chinese were sending warships to the Kruse between Florida and Cuba, that we would like that all that much. But evidently we're still trying to keep a little bit of that old world order. Trump needs to win on this thing as much as China needs the market access. Trump needs it politically. The Chinese need it economically. Typically, when two parties in negotiations, both need something, a particular result, it eventually happens. And we hope that that's the way this ends up. But now they're talking that it could last into June. It'll last as long as it takes. They're going to go back again with face-to-face meetings. Sounds like next week, and they've got some scheduled again in Washington and again in Beijing. So hopefully they'll get somewhere. But as we were kind of chit-chatting, Matthew's in the Mato Grosso right now in Brazil. He was talking about some Chinese origination firms there that were making some investments, in there as far for them to originate. Well, right now the shopping cart from China has been going to South America. We'd like to see a hole in that wall that Donald's been building up here, so that shopping cart comes here. It's going to be very important to us as time goes, but every time one of these Chinese origination firms, it makes an investment in infrastructure in Brazil, that is market share that is going to be very difficult to get back. I don't know quite how that's going to be dealt with in a trade agreement that allows that basically demands that they buy 50 billion in commodities from us every year. But there are a lot of commodities, and that would include some energy in that as well. So it'll soak that up, but it's not going to be all soybeans by any stretch of the imagination. Making America great has, of course, been one of Donald's campaign, a major campaign ploy, I guess, is what I call it. Whatever, it's a salesmanship, is what he is. He's a consummate salesman. But if you really look at what's happened so far, last year in Brazil, my son's in-laws said it was the best year they'd ever had. They had record yields, they had record prices. They say that Donald Trump is the best president that they've ever had. They're on that part, and it really doesn't matter whether that's Russian agriculture, Canadian agriculture, Australian agriculture. For this past year, he's been making all of them great and trying to compensate us for the damage that's being done here. So, looking at current market conditions, Brazil weather has improved late in the soybean growing season. I think that stabilized their yields. I think a lot of them are looking in the 115 million metric ton range. And now that harvest is a little over halfway done countrywide, but we're also seeing their second crop corn that went in under good conditions then on better weather conditions, and looks to be it's going to be a significantly much better production. The swing from last year to this year in production and corn production from South America is pretty astounding, really. Both of them had poor crops last year, and it was estimated, the recent estimates, that it'll be like a 28 million metric ton improvement in their corn crop from year to year. And so that's that last year they were very absent from a competition in our export markets, and what this is saying is that in the year ahead they're going to be back. They're going to be back after some market share as a result of that. The Argentine soybean crop better than last year. Wet weather has moderated some areas, but it's looking good. The Chinese trade talks were extended into March. I guess we need to They're probably going to get extended into maybe as far as June yet, as they continue to talk. The latest USDA carryover, actually, that hasn't been adjusted. It's 900 million bushels now on soybeans. It's still a very large amount. Ethanol production is a very big concern. As I mentioned, all these RIN waivers, they make a big deal out of the E15 and how fantastic it is. And it is great for the long term. But they're going to change pumps, infrastructure, a lot of things that got to happen. First thing, they've got to get the rules there. A lot of these retailers are not going to make an investment or whatever until the rule is actually there, and they're still in that process. And so this particular year, I think it was Green Plains that estimated 300 to 400 million gallons. That can be better, but it doesn't make up for the RIN waivers. The RIN waivers are costing us more than we're going to benefit from E15, I think we said it could be 200 million bushels of demand. The USDA has already reduced corn ethanol usage, by 100 million in the previous recent supply-demand reports. I think there's as much as another 100 million that could come out of that yet, as a result, as these RIN waivers keep coming. We've got carryovers in corn and wheat are projected to grow in 2019. From increased production, possibly soybeans. We'll see. Acreage shift could or will be the driver this spring. When we have a wet spring, planting delays. This 50 billion in Chinese ag commodity purchases, if that was ever consummated, that would be game changing as time goes on here. This is the corn balance sheet. I guess we're going to look at the blue. That was adjusted recently. They did, I believe it was exports that reduced by 100 million bushel. That's to reflect this better South American corn crop that's coming on down there. And that did increase our carryover to 1.835 million bushel. There's going to be another supply demand or a stocks report, next week. There's some of the bulls are thinking that 2018 corn and soybean yields were still overestimated and that they'll make an adjustment in that stocks report. That's a potential surprise on there, but otherwise, that's not we like to get that carryover down to 1.5 or something like that in that particular area. But then we become much more sensitive to weather and what happens, and the market can be more sensitive relative to that. Well, I mentioned this. This basically says, this recent analysis by FAPRI, that's the University of Missouri and Agricultural Policy Research Institute. Their economists show that U.S. ethanol industry could lose 4.6 billion gallons of domestic demand and nearly 20 billion in sales over the next 6 years if the EPA continues its current place of exempting dozens of very small refiners. And they are doing that. They read it just this morning in Bloomberg that they've assured Ted Kruse that they were going to continue with these RIN waivers. And so this is undermined. We were supposed to have a 15 billion gallon ethanol mandate under the RFS, and that's being undermined with all the obligation. What happens is that what has happened is that the price of RINs. Let me back up just one more step further. First of all right, to comply with the renewable fuel standard, a refiner either has to blend a gallon of ethanol, or otherwise it has to buy, a renewable identification number that's assigned to all ethanol that's produced to meet that obligation. Those RINs used to cost somewhere about 60 to 80 cents a gallon. What happened then with all the RIN waivers is that as they eliminate the obligation to enough refiners for enough gallons, the value of RINs has declined significantly. It's down to 10 to 20 cents now. And so therefore it makes it much more easier, for a refiner to meet that obligation without actually blending ethanol. So what has happened is that the blending rate has declined. And what we're seeing then is a slowdown in production. We've seen, ethanol plants idling as a result of that. And the price of ethanol really went to tanked. It went to lows. We're in a situation where right now with the price of corn, what we would have expected to happen is that ethanol production will be very profitable. And it has not been because it has been entirely undermined by these RIN waivers. I guess where I get it into conflict or whatever is that, like Senators Grassley and Ernst and the Iowa corn, that's national corn growers, not the Iowa corn growers, national. And even some of the Renewable Fuel Association. they would talk about how terrible it was for Scott Pruitt to do these RIN waivers. And then never, ever a word about that they're Donald Trump's. Donald Trump cut this deal in the back room with Ted Kruse. And Chuck and Joni Ernst got beat out. It's all there is to it. These are Trump RIN waivers. He is undermining the RFS more than imaginable, to be honest with you, of any president that's happened here. He wants to come out and tell everybody how pro-ethanol he is. And quite frankly, there's been no president that's more anti-ethanol with the policy. Along with the E15 waiver, vapor waiver that was approved, there was also additional provisions in there that would help undermine the RIN market even further. It made it a lot easier for a lot of the underlying rules for how they go about on the RIN side. Essentially what you had is Carl Icahn, who owned a refinery, became, Donald Trump's czar, I guess, as far as deregulation. He highly promoted Scott Pruitt to be head of the EPA. Then when he got in there, then he started doing all the RIN waivers, and all of a sudden the cost of those RINs to meeting that obligation for Carl Icahn fell 75%. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, was like $170 million, or I think it was higher than that. I'm trying to remember what it was, but really, we talk about draining swamps and things, and that's about the swampiest thing I've ever seen in a long time. And so as the investigators start looking into more Carl Icahn, of course, he leaves. They're going to have to run off and find him now. Scott Pruitt's gone too. But the RIN waivers are not. They're being continued under Andrew Weaver. This is just a chart to show the backup what I said about the price of RINs. You look back in 2017, they were, as high as nearly almost $1 a gallon. And they fell below a dime here recently as a result of this watering down the RFS. And so it means that you take away the obligation to have to blend ethanol, and in the refiners, the petroleum industry is going to blend less. That's what it adds up to be. Now, we're being hurt badly, and no one politician, even our national corn growers, will attribute the two words, Trump and RINs together. And they are his policy, and he needs to take responsibility for that. We're looking ahead at, we've got, Acreage is going to be the next big thing that comes up. We're looking at what could happen relative to acreage and what are the risks and lie. We look at last year's production and usage in corn. It's really quite positive. We used 454 million bushels more corn than we used. USDA now has adjusted things, so they're saying carry over 1.835. We look at what last year's corn yield was. The trend line yield for corn being used by USDA is 176.4. Dr. Taylor, in his presentation yesterday, said that the way his initial impression of where these conditions are, that he would be looking for a bushel or two increase over the trend line for this year's corn crop. And so I think this is a yield that we're using or whatever. And so, the USDA in their forum, came out with 92 million acres is what they were looking at, but none of the privates have been able to come up with that yet. They were looking for about a 2.9 million acre increase. Most of the private numbers have been a little less than that. I'm happy with that because I'm planting all corn this particular year. So I hope that nobody else does what I'm doing and goes 100% corn. On the soybean side, not good on the usage versus production versus usage. We produced 493 million bushels more than we consumed. So that puts our carryover at 900 million bushel. Again, last year's yields, we won't get into that, but if we were, I think the USDA at the forum was looking for a 4.2 million acre reduction. Well, I go down to the written words there. This 493 million bushels or more. If our usage versus didn't change, and we're still going to produce with that many too many soybeans, it takes a 9.5 million acre reduction in 2019 soybean acreage not to add to the soybean carryover. So unless we get a big deal with China, where they're coming back and buying a huge amount of our soybeans over the long term, or whatever. And, anything less than we can still increase that carryover. It's not a good situation. I think Alan and I gave our recommendations to. We've sold our beans some time ago for last year, and sold them out in July. Took advantage of the carry, and on that part. So we're feeling okay, I guess, about last year's sales. And I'm not planting any this year. I'm not going to plant them until they straighten this thing out. It just doesn't. I don't like the whole situation with soybeans, and it's too dependent on something political. And if there isn't something politically good, it could get conceivably much worse, and we could see some much worse numbers. Again, the line in here about Dr. Taylor, he reinforced that yesterday. He said that we've got what he called a shaky El Nino. The numbers are there though. That forecast is 70% chance above trendline yield. He looked for 1 to 2 bushels more. In every one of my presentations, I've always included this chart, probably going back since I began doing these types of seminars. This was a study done by Purdue University that what essentially is for corn, for the price of corn, long term. Says you have to go through a base equilibrium period, and the last one prior to this last cycle, was back when we were probably in the price range of $2 to $3 corn. The farmers really weren't making money producing that. The government was giving them LDPs to keep them in production, but the end user was making money. He was able to take that cheap cost, below the cost of production corn, and they could either feed it, and then finally they figured out they could make ethanol out of it. And by adding another over a long period of time, low prices do cure low prices, and that demand base built to the point where there was a launch, where they needed more corn. The ethanol industry was very much a part of that. Then you throw in a spike from the weather. Some macro market situations happen. We get up there to $78 corn for a while. Since then we've had the fall off from that. That $7, $8 corn was basically calling for more corn production. We plowed up a portion of South Dakota, and now they're a major corn growing state as a result of that. And so the supply did come around also from Brazil and other places. And so now we're into I think we're through the landing, and I think we're into a new base equilibrium period. If you note here that the new base will be higher than the old one. But we have to go through a period again where low prices have to cure low prices, where the demand builds up again, that it would support, another bull market in a cycle. If we look at this particular chart as the continuous December corn continuous monthly chart, and I think that you can readily see this basing period that took place. Going back to the date on this from 1890 or 1998, into early 2000s. Then we did see the launch, and we did see the weather and stuff that happened as a result of that. And then we got up there to the 8 something for the peak of that particular long-term cycle. And now we've had our fall off and our landing, and now we've begun a new basing period. I think we're in a new equilibrium period. However, as I look at it, I don't think it's went long enough yet. I think that we're going to have to endure possibly a few more years in this particular price range. That price range has been delineated from about 315 on the downside to about 450 or so on the upside. And so anytime we get back up to that upper end of the range, we need to be pretty aggressive sales here. Hopefully we can get another opportunity at that. It would help again with if we could get a deal with China along those lines to push us back up there. But we're probably not going to do anything extended yet for that time frame. But as I said, we could have another few more years. In fact, also from Dr. Taylor's presentation, he said that the 89-year drought cycle predicts that the year 2025 will be the worst year of the century for crop production. He says you can give or take a year on that. But it very moment, as I look at this, that we may have to, go trade sideways in this range until we get to that drought period. That's the drought that's supposed to emulate the one that occurred in the 1930s on that particular cycle. And so it could take that long before we get prices going. And then, of course, we'll have some production risk at that point in time, too, which is why prices would go higher, right? But we need a little longer period to this basing, I believe. Other shows where we're at currently on the May corn, there is a 40-week cycle low that I think originally it was April relief. There's a couple weeks either side of this. I would say that we've entered the window. That at any time now here we could have this 40-week cycle low in. I would like to think that that we could see a better pricing opportunity. And after this cycle low is set. It can be as a result of a couple of things. They could announce tomorrow that they've had a huge breakthrough in the Chinese trade talks, and that China's going to come in and buy the 7 million metric tons of corn. That'd be 200 and almost, what would that be? Off the top of my head, I don't know. I can't do it that fast anymore. But it's about 40 million bushel for every metric ton. So that would make up for that increase in the carryover that the USDA added last time. That would take that all the way. Plus, that would put us in a better situation for weather. We don't get crazy on adding corn acres. We need some more corn acres. We can handle a couple of million more corn acres in that balance sheet and just be fine. The other thing, of course, could be weather this spring. We're pretty darn wet everywhere. Well, that's a good thing as far as subsoil moisture for later in the summer, but you've got to get the crop in. This week, we had this bomb cyclone event that really hammered the south west Iowa and in Nebraska, and that's it makes good headlines, and it's really devastating to the people that are there, but it's probably not a large enough region to really impact the market overall. But everybody else is wet too. And if we end up with a situation where, similar to last year, where we can't get into the field and such, and this market will start to respond. I plan on planting 100% corn if I can, if Mother Nature lets me. But it's so time will tell here. This particular chart kind of tells the story as far as our relationship with China. Just about every year, there would be a point where we'd come out when someone would make a forecast that, we were going to have a huge carryover, 400 or 500 million bushels of beans or something. And then China would proceed to come in and buy them all. And they essentially would buy them right down the pipeline supply. And every year, no matter what we raised, they would buy them down to pipeline supply. And we're doing that year after year after year. Well, this year, of course, they didn't do that, and that because of the tariffs and the trade war as a result. And so we've now seen this gargantuan carryover. It's not going to be easily rectified. Also what happened is that Brazil, Argentina, other countries expanded a lot of different ways, expanded their oil seed production as a result from the higher prices that from countries that did have access to the Chinese market. And so we've seen a significant increase in that type of competitive production. And so that means that we've got to have a pretty substantive cutback in acreage here that I don't believe is currently being forecast, or it's going to be very difficult to get that carryover down much. And if that realization comes, I think there could still be problems for the soybean market. So a little more friendly corn and not so much on the soybean side. We did get the voter seeding, I guess is what you'd describe it, from the market facilitation payments from USDA. Time will tell, I guess, whether we get another one. I hope we don't need it. I hope there is a trade agreement that fixes that. I'd rather have that be 50 billion coming from China than from taxpayers for us to be able to get our net farm income. Now, again, this is just the balance sheet showing the 900 million bushel carryover that was updated the last time. Exports, of course, are still being forecast to be significantly less than what they were before. As a result, time will tell. That I think that includes these recent promises from China, the first 10 million metric ton, and I think there was a second 10 million metric ton that they're working on too that have been promised. And also what crop year that those get finished in will be important yet too. There might be new crop on some of that, I think, that takes place. We're not looking all that great on the soybean side as far as the charts are concerned. We've kind of rolled over, and it's been a negative situation. So we need to save at this point. The funds have come in, and now they're short to market. some would argue that that can be a bullish thing, and if there's a reason for that, is it does create a pool of potential buying from all these funds that would have to cover those short positions if there was reason to do so. But we need to get the type of technical action. I mentioned there's a 40-week cycle low due in corn, so we're watching for it. Time will tell here as it goes through, but not looking too good there. Well, this actually was from last year. I hope this isn't like, I guess if you were in Nebraska, you'd feel like that today again at this point. Only thing that the crops aren't so good because they aren't going in. There's going to be some acres lost in along the Missouri River as a part of the flooding that takes place. This is looking back at last year. We got some record precipitation in all of these dots that are all these green dots. And it's for 2018, the most that's ever been seen at these locations. And you can see how they were concentrated, up here in northern Iowa and that tier of counties, some of southern Minnesota and on into Wisconsin. And so that it did have a major impact. There's a lot of people here saying 50 bushel less corn as a result of that, because the USDA did start to pare back their rosier corn production total, and some indicate that they may have to pull it back a little more, and you'll see that in the stocks report next week. Time will tell. Maybe, maybe not. I mentioned that as Dr. Taylor said, that we have a shaky El Nino. Right now, we watch the SOI for that. First of all, you look at the colors of the blue is warm and the yellow or the orange is heat out in the Pacific. And we're in a warm situation right now with the El Nino, and you can see a lot of right across. You look at the equator. That's the level where we would look at the color of the ocean at that point in time. We need an SOI of a +7, a -7 for the El Nino, and and it's a 90-day SOI is what's watched. Actually, Dr. Taylor was the one who established that benchmark for what is an El Nino and what's a La Nina basis the SOI. It's supposed to take a 90-day SOI of -7 for a full-fledged El Nino. You can look at there on the 30 days, we're well above that. Aren't quite there yet. We're at -5.86, and so on the 90 days. So it's at this point in time, it's been trending in that direction, toward a La Nina. I keep messing that up. Toward an El Nino, and I guess we have reason to believe he is calling it. He thinks it will be an El Nino year, just on that part of it. So I guess this shows that trend, as I said, in the 90-day, we're getting closer and closer to that -7 for an El Nino. How does global warming impact things? I think I might leave that for a little time here. We're going to get a little long otherwise on some of what we're doing here. Those that subscribe to the Comstock Report, I think I'm going to have a special report on that tomorrow. I did get a chance to interview Dr. Taylor with some good questioning on this particular topic, but that I'm going to be sharing on the Comstock Report as well as that. We've been getting into it a little bit here recently with some of the fanaticism as far as the cattle contributing from both ends, I guess, to the greenhouse gas emissions. Some of the new studies that have come out, though, on that think that it's much less than what some of the more liberal media or whatever was saying it was, something like 2% contribution. But we're not going to get into that too much here today either. Looking at the livestock industry, where our three most significant risks today are protectionism. We've got all these tariffs coming at us, and so I mean the pork industry needs this. We've got the labor. The pork industry needs open markets, is what it needs. We've got a labor shortage. If we could not today find the labor to be able to run all of our plants at maximum capacity between it. It's interesting how they're cannibalizing each other's labor force. If you drive by Storm Lake, Iowa, there's a big billboard right outside of town advertising jobs at the Prestige plant. Now they're hoping they can scalp a few workers or whatever from the Tyson plants there. On that part, there's back and forth with competition. The cost of that labor is going up, and the quality of that labor force is also declining as well. There, when you get down to some of these counties, only got 2.2% unemployment. That means that essentially they've got everybody that you'd ever want working for you, and probably there's some issues with some of that labor force. African swine fever, bigger and bigger all the time, as a major factor to the livestock industries here. There are now starting to be some estimates that the Chinese hog herd may be reduced as much as 30%. That's gonna, and while that's all been happening, they've been under liquidation, which means that they've had more than adequate supply of pork. The hog market this week sense that that's changing now with its sharp, straight up move. They started to be some purchases registered from China, and in our pork, basically our pork is dirt cheap, and so toward the end of the year, this could change dramatically in that they're going to need they're going to be scouring the world to make up for their lost pork production, and this is going to be a great opportunity. How well we're going to be able to respond to it, as I said, get these plants up and running. That's why this labor situation is going to be even more important. Exports have been so important to the pork industry. Essentially, this whole recent round of plant construction and all the new hog barns that have been going up associated with that, in the heartland, was all predicated, frankly, on that we would be part of TPP, that we were going to basically get access to the Asian markets. And so the loss of TPP was a major setback. The blow up over NAFTA was too. And so we need to, there's been really, and we've had some terrible cheap prices as a result of this loss of market access that has to get changed here. And so hopefully we're on the precipice of that happening. The situation in China is probably out of control. No one quite believes that it's they want to, they're going to have pretty good media control over there, what's said, but it's a tough situation. Here's a little video of I'm losing. There we go. This is in China. These hogs are all being waited there to be liquidated for the African swine flu. What do you think PETA would think of that if that was happening that way? They could build a huge, big, deep old trench, and then they just push the hogs into it. And then later they're going to push the sides of that trench in and just cover them all up. One of my impressions is, though, that from that is that, just imagine the soybean demand that's being destroyed by that. We've man's best friend, and boy, that proved that this week. I understand it was the dogs that uncovered the illicit pork import from China that happened this week in New Jersey. And so, but it's this is one day's haul at O'Hare Airport from what the dogs have found for food and that are being carried into the country. And they're pretty good at what they do, finding this stuff. But and that becomes more and more important when they find things like this. This was found in Atlanta. The Beagle Brigade uncovered a roasted pig's head that happened to come from Peru, which is not a country that has African swine fever, but someone tried it from there. They might try it from someplace else too. There is some insurance that was reported from a integrator that was available on this. If somebody wants to look into it, I have no idea, what the premiums and stuff would be, but I think that we can. As long as it stays outside this country, it is a tremendous opportunity to fill the demand that's created from the losses that result from this African swine fever. However, if somehow or another it reaches this country, it will be devastating to the U.S. hog industry. A little bit pull back here for an overview. There's a lot of talk about the current, I guess I'd call it a recession in the ag sector. Versus the ag depression that we went through in the 1980s. This particular chart to me showed it all. What happened we had inflation in the 70s up in Paul Volcker took over as the Fed chairman, and he was going to kill inflation in this country. And he did so by raising interest rates to something like 18%. Well, what happened is, so that means anyone that was leveraged on that side of it, then they had a real problem from paying that type of an interest rate. Nothing worked with those high interest rates. It got any type of debt leverage at all. So then, therefore, they were liquidating assets and farmland, and those asset values tanked. Balance sheets got pretty ugly. But the other result of these high interest rates is that investors all around the world looked at this and they said, "My gosh, these dumb Americans, they're paying 15 to 18% for these treasuries, and we get the full faith and credit of the government, and they're giving us all this interest." And the money poured into the United States. Well, that money was converted from yen and marks and pounds and whatever, pesos and whatever it was from anybody that had it. And so they had to buy dollars. And so the US dollar index went to 164.72, which just destroyed our exports. It made us totally uncompetitive in the export market with that type of a currency transaction. So therefore, now we got to look clear over to the right. Look at the current high was last year was at 103. We talked about that being a strong dollar, and about how that was already starting to impact some of our exports, but it is nowhere close to the 164, and it has since backed off and moderated, and even was somewhat lower this week as the Fed said they were going to stop raising interest rates and that the economy wasn't growing quite as fast as what had been previously forecast. There's another impact from the debt and the interest rates too, or those rates, of course, had been on the rise. So they say they're going to put a pause on that right now. That was both the long-term and the short-term rates. One thing I've noted that's maybe of concern is the flattening yield curve, and I guess that's best actually looked at in the purple, I guess, a trend line below. When anytime that we've seen short-term rates move above long-term rates, it's usually preceded a recession, and they're getting pretty darn close to that right now. Is what's happened. As the Fed increased those short-term rates, the long-term rates actually went down, and so we've seen a convergence between that. Something that we still need to keep an eye on. We've this promise of 3% growth is proved fleeting. That's what Trump promised, and it ain't gonna happen. They're going to have to pass a lot more stimulus. In part, he wasn't wrong from a situation where these tax cuts put a pretty good jolt into the market as far as a fiscal stimulus. That's what you call that, fiscal stimulus. But at the same time, the Fed was pulling back, and so it was tightening on the monetary policy. And essentially, so that means that Trump was pushing on the gas and they were pushing on the brake. And so it's not really all that surprising that we didn't see this big surge in growth that was being talked about because actually the Fed would be partly responsible for that. They were concerned about the interest rates being too low and inflation as a result of that. And so so now we're in a kind of a wait and see added period, but they were only projecting now 2.1%, for this year, not the big growth. So that means that when that happens, they were also looking for this growth, this tremendous growth, to add to revenues, to tax revenues. Ain't gonna happen. And so we aren't quitting spending, and the tax bite from servicing all this debt is now grown from what it used to be. And so now you start projecting these $1 trillion deficits for about as far out as you can see. And our federal debt keeps going up and up and up. And that's a problem. Again, we're going to hit $1 trillion basically annually, as where this thing is right now. And so, one of the things when we look back to the Obama years or whatever is that, yes, the debt as a result of the safety net and the Great Recession, federal debt soared. But at the same time, the Fed was taking interest rates down at such a rate to near zero that even though the principal increased significantly, the cost of servicing it did not, because the interest rate had fallen so much. And so we kind of was flat on the cost of servicing. And so we thought, so it never really, they didn't feel it in the budget in Washington as a result of that. They didn't feel that type of pressure. But now, as we've seen the interest rates come off of this, and our debt continue to increase as it is, this red line is the net interest cost. And you can see that it's how it's projected to move above what we spend for defense or Medicaid We're already, very shortly, that's going to happen in the case of Medicaid, but also on the defense as well. In other words, we're risking a situation where with the debt accumulation that we've got and the cost of servicing that debt, that we start continuing to squeeze out any of the discretionary spending that as a result of that. I don't think this is a very secure outlook longer term. And but Congress is totally dysfunctional as far as addressing it or doing anything about it, as much as they're dysfunctional on most things. Oh, I mentioned going back to agriculture here, that this should be closer to a break-even year. Yeah, if you notice here, their costs have been, they haven't gone down enough, relative to the revenues. So we've been losing money on that part of it, and so revenues went down, relative to the cost. And so really from 2014 on, we've been in a negative cash flow, we've seen a lot of deterioration in balance sheets as a result of that. Well, now we're getting back, hey, we might be break even this year. And then if the right things would happen, it might even be better than that. But anyway, that's what the situation looks like. From a big situation on the ag debt, we're looking at 400, getting back to above 400. I think it's 426 was the projection for this year. Getting pretty close to where we were for total debt back in the 1980s. However, our asset base is so much larger that our debt to asset ratio is nowhere near nearly as bad as it was back then. I think it's we're only like 15% leveraged, whereas we're over 20% back at that point in time. So on that part of it. But again, as we have these, we've been negative cash flows, the need to restructure loans, and then interest again becomes a more of a factor. When it was 3% interest back there, we hardly noticed it. 6% starts to come up and be a different story relative to that. So, well, this is my final slide, I guess, is unfortunately things aren't going to change a heck of a lot. Ted Kruse appears to be the one that's got us pretty good this time around instead of Scott Pruitt. So maybe some of the names have changed, but this uncomfortability is going to continue. We're going to continue to do what we do here, which help people try to manage these periods and these risks that we're being confronted with. We can't change what those are, but we certainly can work on how we manage it. So anyway, I'm gonna wind that up and thank people for participating in this. We got some questions, John? Or okay. I understand we have some questions. He's got to do a little change into the screen here. Just one question here. I guess they were looking for our thoughts on picking which government program to sign up for yet, PLC or ARC. Well, let's go back to the last one. Last time we did chose ARC. That was essentially because of the size of the payments that we would get early. It was almost a guaranteed situation that we were going to get some very good payments early. It was a bird in the hand versus something in the bush. And although some were arguing that when the egg economy and the price situation deteriorated and the way PLC was set up, that it never rose to this occasion. It never got to the point, I don't think, where it ever exceeded the benefit that you got under ARC. Now this time around, it's going to change, and it sounds like the one to do is the way they put together the numbers and the formulas for this one here. That this time it's more likely going to be PLC is going to be the one of choice, but time will tell. We haven't done all the work that we need to do on this, but that's at least the initial reaction to this choice that we face again is that in all likelihood it's going to be the other one, the PLC, that we go with. Matthew, any comments from the Mato Grosso?
Well, as near as I can tell, the crops are doing well. The second corn crop overall, and the cotton is off to a very good start. It's got a ways to go though, but I think the soybean crop is it's not completely known, but they're starting to zero in on what the final number is going to be. But it looks like it's going to be between that 114 to maybe 116 million metric tons. So like I said, the Mato Grosso has pretty much all been done with harvest. So they're 55–60% done with the harvest. So they have a pretty good idea by now. They've been getting some more rains now in Bahia in the northeast, and so I don't see it. That's kind of put a floor on any potential drop in production, and so I don't see it getting much worse as they finish the first soybean crop. But there's been with the second crop corn, there's been a lot of people complaining actually about too much rain now, and so they had a dry spell in January that hurt things a little bit. But you actually see some rough areas in the corn. Driving through the central part of Mato Grosso, a lot of ponding and yellowing of the corn, but you also see a lot of great fields too. So I think overall they're still on track to have a solid crop year. So they've actually the soybeans got hurt a little bit from drought, and now the corn's got hurt a little bit from too much rain. So but overall they're still going to have a solid crop year.
Yeah, but one just another topic with you, Matthew. I know that recently there was a corn feedstock ethanol plant started in the Mato Grosso. Do you have any information on how well that's performing and what the outlook there is for most of Brazil's ethanol production is sugar based, but in the Mato Grosso now, being they have this supply of cheap corn, they're moving more toward corn based. A little bit of an overview on that.
Yeah, I mean the land production is already gone through a major development phase, and now I'd say that Brazil and specifically Mato Grosso is entering phase 2, where you now have all of the value added industries coming in, like the ethanol plants and grain processing and all of that. And so it's still early, but as near as I can tell, the ethanol plants are doing well, and they're planning major expansion. They're already purchased land and beginning the phases, the groundbreaking for the second plant, which is less than an hour away from the first plant. And so they're getting ready to start building the second plant. There's another company that I see is probably halfway done building another plant. So in a very short amount of time, you're going to see 3 100 million gallon plants. And I think you hear several stories about other people planning ethanol plants as well. And so you hear dozens of stories, and not that they're all going to get done, but the point is there's people are finally seeing. I always said once you saw one, then there were going to be a lot of other people that wanted to do it too, similar to the United States. And so they're starting to see that a major interest and a lot of growth in the ethanol, and that's going to create demand for more forest and eucalyptus, because they don't have the natural gas that we do, that how we power our plants in the United States. So there's going to be a big demand for people to plant eucalyptus trees, which is they turn that into wood chips, and that's what they use to power the plants. You're going to see a lot more DDGs being produced then, and so people believe that cattle is also going to increase in the Mato Grosso, and it's already is there's a lot of cattle production already, but it's all pasture, and so they think that they'll see a move to more intensive cattle production as all these DDGs become more available. And so they have to create a market for those DDGs, similar to in the United States 20 or 30 years ago. But I think people are very optimistic, and so there's just so much potential along those lines, and you can tell a lot of people are excited about the future here.
Good.
One other thing I learned there, they've made a major push here now that I think they're down to their last 30 miles, I was told, of asphalting the road between Mato Grosso and the Amazon ports at Santarém. And that's kind of a big deal. I mean, because since I've been in Brazil for 15 years or more, they've always talked about that, and you see all those pictures of those trucks getting stuck in the mud, and most of those were in that going up to that port in the north.
BR 162, isn't that the highway? Or
yeah, and so now it's they're at the final stretch and of getting that done, and so I think that's a big deal, and so you're continuing to see more grain being exported to the north through those ports. I talked to someone that owns a port there yesterday, actually, and so they're pretty excited about the future of that. So it's that's just it's slow progress, but they are heading in the right direction, and I think they have a president that I think is really supported the ag industry. He's been pretty verbal about supporting their ag industry, and so I think he's going to get a lot of the credit for these transportation projects that get completed.
Got a few more questions here. One is concerning the Farm Bill. How long will current subsidized crop insurance be available? Well, this is a political as well as fiscal issue. I think it was just 2 years ago, President Trump addressed the Farm Bureau annual convention in Nashville, and I watched his speech at that time, and he brought up how farmers love crop insurance, and he was going to make sure that it was protected. And then his most recent budget cuts ag budget by 15%, and the crop insurance took some very, very healthy cuts in that, particularly on the subsidized side and what they would do. At the same time, I think it was the Kansas senator, head of the Senate Ag Committee, that said that there would be no cut in crop insurance. So we're going to be at some loggerheads, relative to that for a while. Here again, I'm going to go back to this bigger picture situation, though, and that if our fiscal situation is that our debt is going to increase like it is, these tax cuts were financed with debt. There was no cash involved here or equity. It was debt, and that debt comes as a continuing expense every year. We're going to add to it with our current level of spending. It's we can make some provisions to reduce that level of spending, but pretty soon that choice won't be there, because the cost of servicing that debt is going to get so large that the discretionary spending is going to get squeezed. At some point in time, you won't have money for a USDA. You'll be taking care of basic people's needs, and that's all. So that's the long-term answer to that. Next question: 50 billion in sales to China would be great, but would this really be good to be back to being so dependent on one customer? And I get that point. I was pointing out in my presentations for years how we looked at it. We were creating great risk in that China was our dominant soybean buyer. You took the next 9 soybean customers that we had, and they didn't equal together half of what we were selling to China. And so we did have all our eggs in one basket, and that's not. But at the same time, they're looking at it now and saying that, gee, the United States is no longer a reliable supplier. And Donald Trump, of course, in this new agreement is already pushing this week that he can leave these tariffs on, and that, of course, if they don't comply with something, that he might do something else. It's going to be very difficult here to get a particular agreement that everyone's good to go on, and so maybe this 50 billion in sales to China would make us dependent on them again. You're absolutely right on a lot of things. It's a big number. We did our economist David Shively did a report on it here recently. We looked at how many things that would consume, and it would be material to a lot of markets. But at the same time, the risk is there. And I think one of the things we've lost is trust. You go back to what Jimmy Carter's grain embargo with Russia. And Russia decided that we weren't a reliable supplier. A lot of other nations did when we started doing things like that. I think that Kansas is still hurt from that today. Kansas wheat growers, we're still the residual supplier to the world wheat market. They'll go to Russia first. They'll go other places first. And we're still suffering from that, and from that aspect of it. Next question, will the continued push against ethanol break the industry? Will this allow the oil industry to steal the industry from the farmers? And will electric vehicles kill the industry anyway? Well, I'm going to answer the last part of that question first. And the electrical vehicles are going to take a long time. That technology is not adaptable or whatever that as much as what people seem to think at this point. Up here in our country, when it gets cold in the winter, the battery life is very short. It's really not going to work in cold climates yet. They've got a lot of things to overcome. Might work in Florida or California, but not here. So it's going to be slow growth there, I think, relatively, not as quick. The other aspect is, will this allow the oil industry to steal the industry from us? Well, it already is. Basically, what's Valero's buying the Green Plains renewable plants. So they've already started to steal the industry. From that aspect of it. And so the answer to that question, is it could break the industry. When we got into this ethanol value added situation, we were looking at it from a farmer investment. Was that okay? When corn prices were high, ethanol production probably wasn't going to be that profitable, and so we wouldn't get any dividend checks from the ethanol companies. But we were getting a good price for our corn. We were making money. Hey, everything's life is good. On the other hand, if the price of corn was dirt cheap, that would mean then that ethanol companies would be making good money making ethanol, and we would get dividends from that, and that would supplement our corn income and make us get us closer to being whole. It was a very good theory until they started undermining the RFS with these RIN waivers. Donald Trump has killed this thing, and right now, the National Corn Growers, the Renewable Fuels Association and such, are scared to death of this president. They will not put his name against what he's doing because they're afraid of retaliation. They were afraid that he wouldn't go through with E15. He has a way of intimidating people. At the same time, how do you get it to stop? He beat Joni Ernst and he beat Chuck Grassley. He gave it to Ted Cruz. There's no other way to look at it. That's the way it is. And it's not a political deal. That's what it is. It's what we're seeing happen. And so, yes, this industry is at risk at this point in time, as long as under the current policies of this president. Next question. We have, I got to get it up here. You have several interesting charts with long-term commodity prices. How about a chart relating to the S&P? How bad or long will our recession last? I'm not as much of a stock trader as what we probably need to ask Ellen Heffling about that. He'd be the good source of our charts on that. But I hate to make any great predictions or whatever on the stock market, but I think that we're certainly entering a period here of some potential instability, slowing down of the global economy and such, and so far we're walking by the graveyard is the way I would put it, which makes me nervous in a lot of markets, and particularly the equity market would be one of them. Where are the opportunities in ag for a young person starting farming? I hope this young person has a father who's already a farmer. First of all, that's almost a prerequisite to this. You've got to have somebody to be able to help you get started, because this is such an equity intensive industry at this point in time. And I've just talked about levels of debt and what can be assumed and stuff. Though there's a number of government programs, new land purchases that some young people are taking advantage of, and that's a great thing. I look forward to that. At the same time, I'm looking at this thing as agriculture is long term, and so this recession or setback, whatever, to me is still ultimately a buying opportunity. You can look at it with your glass half empty or glass half full. And I guess that's you've got to have equity to be able to take advantage of opportunities, and that's also a tough situation for a young farmer too. A lot of the young people are aligning with integrated livestock producers and such, and And I've not gotten into that either. I've always worried about, I've always liked to be an independent producer as much as I can. But I think that those were valid opportunities for some young people out here today. But part of it's going to be generational change. And there's a lot of good operations here that they're going to need someone to come in and take over. You know, there's a pretty good segment of farmers that are probably around 60 years old or older that are looking very shortly here for some retirement. And so those operations are going to get melded into others. And so, but at the same time, you need someone with a base of equity to help get that started. And so, you know, I guess I'm bullish. If the neighboring farm comes up for sale, I'm going to try and buy it. But at the same time, I'm not young either. But we're going to try and make that transition to the next generation as well. The next, I'm hoping in 3 or 4 years, Matthew is the one that is working on some of this production agriculture here on my side of it. Last question. What are the odds of a huge trade deal with China? My perspective is this, that based on history, Trump's trade war will not end well. Well, I think your historical perspective is quite accurate. You know, we most of these trade wars did not end well. You know, the tariffs and such, yeah, they were used here to get China to the table as a wake-up deal. But the overall situation is bigger than that, whether they can actually get to a deal or not. There's a lot of underlying issues relative to their structure of the Chinese economy. How far are they willing to go? Well, these big offers that Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue is talking about, that China's coming with the $1.2 trillion worth of purchases over, you know, overall of U.S. goods over a 10-year period. They're all predicated on them getting let off the hook for something. And right now the hardliners are the ones that are really pushing, you know, the trade agreement. And so you say, you know, what are the odds for a trade deal? You know, on the other side of it, as I've mentioned, you know, Donald Trump needs a win. Right now, the negotiations with China are blocking him moving forward on Japan and the European Union. And so actually, if we do get done with China and there is an agreement, he's going to go full-fledged into attack on the other two. And so this trade war globally is by no means done. We're just going to change opponents here. If he beats one and they get an agreement, he's going to go after the others, probably with gangbusters. And so we could end up some issues with Europe and with Japan too. Japan's a very important trading partner too. So that would water down, you know, maybe some of the good that would come from a Chinese deal if we get into a dust up with Japan. And so it's a long, this is a long path yet. I think anyone that really tried to predict the outcome here is smoking something. You know, it's going to be very hard to do. Again, I'm going to go back one more time though, that Donald Trump needs this badly politically, and in what he needs politically, you know, that's an awful lot of pressure on him at some point in time, that, you know, he'll say, "This is good enough. I'm going to take this. I've got to win. It'll be the most fantastic, you know, trade deal ever in history. I'm fantastic. Look what I did. You know, reelect me. You know." And the other side of it is that China is reeling right now from it's under economic pressure. It's seeing this rate of GDP growth decline, and they need stability. They need to be able to take this cat off their back, so to speak, so that they can address some of their economic issues at home and make this adjustment as well. So they both need a deal, and so I think in the end, it probably leans it a little more toward something happening positively. But at the same time, you know, with it's huge uncertainty as far as it coming together. Well, I think that's the last question. So I think I'll thank you all for participating in this webinar. I hope that you got something useful out of it, and we're looking forward to doing this again sometime in the near future. Matthew, got anything down there?
All right, no, that's all. I again apologize for the delay in the beginning, and you know, as we said, we'll send this link out to you so you can rewatch the slideshow presentation again. So thank you all for joining.
All right, thank you. We'll get this thing put together. I think you'll have access to it. You'll do a link or whatever for them if they want to see it all again. So, all right, bye-bye.